our council meeting, Monday, September the 20th, 2021. We did have a closed meeting, and now we'll call this meeting to order, and we'll go around and do a roll call. Councillor McCrae.
Here.
Councillor Dunsmore.
Here.
Councillor Kittredge.
Present.
Councillor McElwain.
Present.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Present.
Councillor Foster.
Present.
Okay, we are all here. There are no addendums or corrections to the agenda. Any disclosure of pecuniary interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act with anything on our agenda today? Okay, seeing none. We did have a closed meeting today as council. There is nothing to report out of that closed meeting at this time. Moving on to item 7, approval and adoption of minutes. We have a committee of the whole minutes from July the 19th. A recommendation of the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting held July 19th, 2021 be adopted as circulated. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. Any comments or questions about those minutes? All in favor? And those carry. Moving on to presentations and announcements. And before we get to our presentation, I do have some news to share with council. Unfortunate news in my mind. I received our CAO, Andy Goldy's letter of resignation end of last week. So his last day will be December the 31st, 2021. And we will begin the recruitment of a new CAO. That will go on over the next few months. A news release will go out to this effect today. It'll talk about Andy's 33 years of municipal service, almost 16 years with the township. I won't say too much about Andy right now because he has a couple months left with us, and I will save that for our last council meeting in December. That I just wanted to let council know that will be happening as of December the 31st. Okay, moving on to our presentations announcements. We have joining us today, we have Peter Cameron and we have Mike Labbe from Home Opportunities, not for profit. And this is a result of a notice of motion that was approved, that was put forward by Councillor Kittredge. To introduce them, I've asked Yana Burns from the county to introduce them. They have been working with the county's working group over the last couple weeks, and they have done a presentation to the county's working group. So I wanted to make sure that this township council was aware of was provided an update of the discussions that the two of them have had with the county. And Yana is the director of economic development at the county, and she oversees and chairs the working group that we have assembled at the county level. So I'll turn things over to Yana, and she will turn things over to Peter and Mike. Welcome, Yana.
Thank you, Mayor. I think everyone's having conversations both in the office and at home about how difficult it is to find a place to live. And we're seeing it from an economic development perspective where employers are really having trouble attracting labor. And come the winter time, when folks start commuting in snow, they might have trouble retaining it. So alongside the township's very progressive Healthy Growth and Advisory Committee, the County Task Force on Attainable Housing is going to start looking at encouraging new units through opening up our community improvement plan. And then we're also going to soon start having conversations in the public realm about the need for attainable housing and how it affects everyone. So what it means when an employer can't find somebody to work past 5 p.m. And how it ultimately affects our quality of life if you can't get to a restaurant in the evening. And then the final piece is that we're also having conversations with various organizations to explore possible solutions. And one of these is Home Opportunities nonprofit. And they've developed a model for home ownership. So we're not talking about rentals, we're talking about home ownership, which is really important. And you have Mike Labbe here today to present that model. And it ultimately is a nonprofit partnership that could potentially include the county. So we found it very valuable to be talking to them and have several conversations with them. And I think it's great that you're going to be hearing from it today too. And at the county level, we're certainly looking forward to more of these conversations. So I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, just before I turn it over to Mike, I forgot to mention that members of the Healthy Growth Advisory Committee were also invited to this meeting so that they could hear the same information that our Township Council heard at the same time. So just wanted Council to be aware of that. Over to you, Mike.
Wonderful, and thank you for inviting me, Mr. Mayor and councilors and others. I have a PowerPoint that I'll share that I want to go through fairly briefly. The presentation to the task force was in quite detail, and so I'm quite happy to sort of give this council a sense of what we were working with and what we're dealing. And the interesting thing is that we've designed a model that doesn't need grants and subsidies. And what that means is that all we need is access to land at fair market value with a patient landowner that will allow the land to be paid for when construction starts. So it opens up the door to a lot of parcels that wouldn't normally be available. So I like the idea of letting everybody in the county know, because we never know who knows somebody that is interested in helping with attainable housing so that we have the housing that's necessary to make sure that your jobs are filled. So let me just, is that coming onto the screen for you?
Yes, it is, Mike.
Perfect. So I've got sort of 5 slides that I'm focusing on, and then we'll go to questions as the councillors would like to ask it. The first one simply explains that we're working with a nonprofit system that partners with the private sector. And it partners with the private sector in exactly the same way that a developer would, except our developer is a cooperative corporation composed of people who want to own homes in the location that we're working on. So we are effectively Home Opportunities is providing the expertise to allow people to build their own homes. Our role in that capacity is to give people what they want, and what they want is quality at a cost-effective carrying cost. And so that's our function. What happens is that because we're a consultant working with a cooperative that is working on a specific site, and once it's done building a home for each of its members, which are generally condominiumized, there is a surplus. And so there's a third company called Community Wealth Cooperative, which is a multi-stakeholder cooperative that holds the surplus. So that what we end up creating is a little pool of money that is used for economic development in the regions that it's created in. And so that's your 3 pieces. The people who want to own, forming a cooperative corporation, us giving us the expertise, and a cooperative corporation that's composed of multiple participants that oversees a pool of money to continue to do more and more housing after we've done the first development. And you can see that the cooperative hires a contractor, and we prefer to hire local. So we look for local contractors. Our financing comes from multiple sources, which I'll explain in another slide. And they hire the lawyers and architects and engineers they need to apply to the city in the normal way that a developer would. And there is the possibility of freehold housing, but it's never been cost effective. So we've always tended to stick to a condominium and tending to work with higher densities, 15 to 20 units to the acre in a multiplex form. So that's the corporate structure and what it's trying to achieve. I'm not going to go through this one in detail. All it's doing is explaining that when you ask the question, how do you put the most cost-effective housing on a piece of land, you actually build something different that you might build if you're trying to maximize profits. And there's nothing wrong with maximizing profits. It's just that it's nice to have another focus, which is how do we serve people the best? And very simply put, that when you sit down and try to figure out how to keep something cost effective, you actually generate something that costs you much less to get into. So for this example, which is a 3-bedroom townhouse, which would be worth in the market 520, which of course is a year and a half ago. So things have moved even since then. You can deliver that to a homeowner at 410. Because we're put in place in order to help people own, the difference between what the market value is of a simpler townhouse and the cost to get in, the $70,000, which is held by community wealth because it's holding the wealth for reinvestment later, is lent to a purchaser. So they start with $70,000 down. So one of the key things that we do is to help people with their down payments so that we can work with smaller down payments than you normally would work. And we have enough down that they don't have to pay CMHC insurance. All the rest is just detail. But that's the key ingredient, is that because we're nonprofits, the profits are passed on as help with the down payment to the purchasers that we're working with. When they're done, and sell their home, that money goes back to the fund and is used to give another person of equivalent income housing as well. So this isn't about locking stuff in place, but we're also not asking for grants and subsidies. It's about perpetually providing more and more housing to serve your workforce and your low-income population. The next one is the innovation that we've really added to the marketplace. And this is how we produce the affordability. We are targeting households and individuals with incomes between $30,000 and $60,000 a year to give them a chance to own. And we wanted to do that in a way that didn't require grants and subsidies, because the scale of the problem in this country is so large that if you exclusively try to address it with grants and subsidies, you will never be able to address the scale of the problem. If you address it through lending, which is how we're doing it, then you have the ability to source enough financing to actually grow to whatever scale is necessary. So the change in thinking for the county is to say, we need 3,000 units of attainable housing. Let's do 300 units a year. Now let's find the land. That, by the way, is Peter Cameron, so I suspect he's having trouble getting on. So we then need to simply address how can we come up with enough land for 300 units, because it's not going to cost anybody anything in grants and subsidies or reduce land value to move forward. So in essence, what all this chart shows, the 70,000 we just talked about, which is provided by community wealth, that shares in the appreciation is only repayable when someone sells. If they rent, they have to pay it off as well. So this is an owner-occupant designed program. Because that's 17% and you need 20% to avoid CMHC, we can actually work with purchasers who have an average of 3% down. Then through CMHC, the province or pension funds, the purple and the burgundy is also loans that don't have to be paid back until you sell. So nearly 50% of the value of the home shares in the home's profit, but doesn't create carrying costs. So you're looking at a mortgage of $287 on a market value of $480. And that's the intelligent financing that we've put together that starts to help people own virtually no matter what their income, as long as they have an income. And the neat thing is that as a nonprofit, we can access CMHC financing at preferred interest rates. And so we put those in place as a bulk loan and provide sub mortgages to people that will carry at $690 a month plus $316 for utilities and common expenses, giving you the potential of a 3-bedroom that carries at $1,006 a month, which is well below your affordable rental guidelines. And that's intentional, because the last thing we talk to municipalities about is the option of deferring property taxes on 30% of the units until first resale. And then you get paid and you get interest on that. And because our densities are generally much higher from that property, you'll still get the same amount of tax, and they get your bonus of taxes later on, because we like to work in the 15 to 25 unit to the acre range. And that gives you a lot more value on that property than you often get from other forms of housing. So that's the core of the financing. I don't want to go into much more detail than that unless questions push me there. But I wanted to mention two other things, and then we can go to questions to council. The one is, the question came up, well, what does this mean? Because community wealth and home opportunities are involved with more than doing housing. We want to use housing as a mechanism to alleviate poverty. But you can't alleviate poverty without housing. So housing always becomes the first and driving force. So when we're working with somebody who can manage $14,000 down, and we have a rent-to-own program that I won't go into, but we do have that available. What happens to get them out of poverty? And what this does is gives you an example of the same example we were talking about. And then on the next slide, it allows for a 3% increase over 10 years, which, as you know, is pretty modest in this particular market. At the end of those 10 years, that household has $131,000 in equity. And that's the generational wealth that ownership creates to allow people to move themselves out of poverty just by owning homes. And so by making the homes affordable to anybody who has a steady job, who's a long-term resident, you get the benefit of that secondary effect. This is the rent-to-own program. I'm not going to go through it. Suffice to say that our rent-to-own program allows somebody to sign up with a savings program with a credit union and has to save a minimum of 1% in order to get title. So they might actually be in an interim occupancy position with their ownership until 5 years down the road, but they're consistently and constantly saving in order to allow them to become owners. So we've tried to accommodate every single person that sees themselves as a permanent ongoing resident. So they're never forced to live their lives in rental. They always have a way to move themselves out. So there's a lot here, and I apologize because there is a lot here. And I should have said at the beginning that I've been doing affordable housing since 1979. So you're looking at 42 years of experience that have come together to create a way we can do housing without needing grants and subsidies. And it took me that long to figure it out. So there's a lot that has gone into this that I can answer by way of questions, but I was intending just to stick to something fairly brief. So that's it. I'm open and available to questions or a suggestion from anyone that I missed something from what they've heard previously.
Thanks very much, Mike. Peter, I see that you're on now. Do you have anything to add to that, or should I just go to questions?
I think just go directly to questions. Sorry for being late.
That's okay. Yeah, okay, that sounds great. And I'm also going to allow the members of the advisory committee to also ask questions as well, as this is their opportunity to know more about this program. So I will tack those on after we've gone through council. Okay, Councillor McCrae.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. The only question I have is in terms of the source of land. Do you rely on private developers to sell you that land, or are you looking to the municipalities themselves to provide the land?
So we are open to any source of land. Obviously, government-controlled land is easier because we have the same interests and they can wait to get paid till construction starts. But we've had good success with private landowners that actually care about social issues. And in smaller cities, I find they're far more common. And so they want to get their fair market value because they're looking after their interests and their children's interests, but they don't mind waiting a year and a half for the approvals to get in place. So we're open to private sector sites that are serviced, that are within the urban envelope, that can take the densities that we're looking for. And so we're happy to do that as well. The other source of land, which is probably down the road, is this model allows you to do inclusionary zoning in a way that doesn't cause developers to get upset. Because what happens is you basically say, we'd like you to set aside 25% of your land in a large development for affordable ownership housing, and you will get paid fair market value for that land. So they are losing the opportunity cost of making a profit, but it's not like the other inclusionary zoning items where you basically say, we're sorry, you're going to have to use your profits to subsidize rental units on your property, and everybody gets upset. By using an approach that says, we'll pay you a fair market value, and so you need to give us a societal benefit, and all you're giving up is your opportunity costs. And developers who care about the communities they're in have no trouble with that.
Thank you.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, my question was around land too. So I'm wondering, have you done any surveys in this area? Have you reached out? Are you probing anybody to see what kind of availability is here in this community?
No, our practice has generally been to inform the bureaucracies and the councillors, because they know. I've learned long ago that I don't go elsewhere and pretend to understand and know. Between yourselves, between the task force, between staff, most of the sites are well known, and you know the personality of the owners and the developers in terms of who is most excited about trying to satisfy the issues that are going on in the township, because everybody benefits from being able to fill all jobs, right? And so tying jobs to housing is the best way to get someone hired that will be very interested in your community.
Thank you.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to thank Mike and Peter for coming, and the rest of council for allowing this for our community to hear them about attainable housing. I feel very strongly about this, and I explained that when I made my presentation before, because it had benefited me personally. Purchasing an equity co-op and then being able to go into purchase my own home outside of that, outside of Toronto. So, and it really helped me build the capital that I needed for my future life. And I think that it's a great opportunity. I think there is, I mean, this issue was in the federal election. That's how pertinent it is on a national level. And I feel very strongly that in this area, there is, you know, I talk to people on the street and artists, and the artists can't live here anymore, you know, and I feel very strongly that this would allow for a whole segment of people that, because we're in such an area of high growth and expensive increases in property values and houses, I think this is a great opportunity. I just wanted to point out that this is not about creating a little ghetto of only one kind of housing in an area. It's integrated with the whole, all the other kind of housing. So anyway, I support this, and thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kittrus. That's a really good point, and I wouldn't mind Mike going into that a little bit, because he talked a lot about that ghetto concept with the working group. Mike, can you explain that a little bit for the team here?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was going to jump in and do that because it is something well worth mentioning. So the model works to produce a blended income community within the housing that it builds. So if there's room within the ability to defer the taxes, that's where you're going to get incomes between $25,000 and $55,000 in 30% of the units. That means that the other 70 are paying their taxes, and 30% more would be paying their taxes as the next step, and that would mean you're talking $33,000 to $63,000. Then you would have another step at 20% where they're actually probably not taking as much of the loans that we're giving as they need, because their incomes are now traveling in the 40 to 70,000 range. And then 20% of the households would be elevated incomes anywhere from 50 and up. So you've got a blended income community from the beginning, which is where we all live. And so we want to replicate that. And then the neat thing about the model is people sell their home, regardless of what their income was at the beginning, into the marketplace at a market price. So that community upgrades in income, just like all communities do. And then the money is released back to community wealth, and it goes to another blended income housing development somewhere in the same region. So you have this community created that upgrades and improves, and then another one is created that's nice and blended, and it upgrades and improves, and you just move around the community, creating all this interesting mixed income housing. And I'll mention one thing that I forgot. The money that is received by community wealth, 60% of it has to go back to producing that housing. But 30% of it can go to supporting social enterprises that provide jobs for the hard to employ. And 10% can go towards capacity building and education, which is why we think of ourselves as a poverty alleviation tool, because we start with housing, then we work on jobs, and then we work on job training. And that really puts all the pieces in place that you have to make all households stronger.
Thanks for clarifying that and going into a little bit more detail, Mike. Councillor McElwain? Oh, sorry, Councillor McElwain, you're still muted.
Okay, we'll start again. Thank you for the presentation. You just touched on my question that I had planned, but I'm not sure I understood 100% what you just said. It had to do with the resale of the homes over time and how that, do those homes stay in a low cost environment, or do they become market value? And I think you said they become market value, but the money gets used. I didn't really understand it. I guess I'm not a financier.
No, that's fine. Let me try. So basically, when someone sells, you're right, they sell into the market, because when you start to interfere with the marketplace by controlling resales, it causes secondary effects. So what we've done is designed a financing system whereby we can use the money from a sale to build a new unit for a similar income group. So two things happen when someone sells. The $70,000 is repaid to community wealth, but also the first mortgage that the person has, because it's a bulk mortgage, the first mortgage gets released to be lent to another low-income purchaser. So we have two pools of capital that we use to produce an additional replacement unit for low-income people. So we're doing it through the financing mechanism, not by controlling the resale of the house.
A lot of the questions of the county's working group were around that item, Councillor McElwain. I just wanted to stay there for a minute because I think it's a really, really important point. So the prices in a given property will be going up, but what you're doing is building the financial capacity to continue to build attainable homes in another location. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's exactly accurate. Remembering that each house we build produces 1.5 jobs. And
that again gets back to that ghetto comment that was initially talked about. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you, Mayor, and or through you, Mayor, and thanks, Mike, and for coming out here. Most of my questions were answered. One was definitely on the land aspect and getting people to buy into the idea, or if the municipality has to be part of it. And also the financing piece. I like your strategy, especially the aspect of not toying or playing with the resale market, because when we get into there, we create all new problems again. So I like what you put there, and I'm going to look deeper into what your program is. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, gentlemen, for a very interesting presentation. I have a couple of questions. First of all, Michelle, I wondered if you could talk me through the deeded ownership of the property. how does that work? Normally, when you buy a house, you become the registered owner, but in this case, I feel like there's various stages where you may occupy it, and down the road, you become the deeded owner or have title to the property. Can you just elaborate on that and help me understand how that would work over time as you accrue equity and so on?
For sure. And it's partially because of the rent-own plan that it gets a bit confusing. So for the majority of the purchasers, probably 90% of the purchasers, the only thing that's unusual is they are members of the development company that's developing the site. So they're members of the cooperative that acts as developer, because developers always start by owning the housing when you're dealing with a condominium, because the condominium is registered after completion of the housing. So what happens is the cooperative acts as a developer, builds the housing, people move in prior to registration, because when a unit is done, people move in. Then you go through the registration process, and once it's registered, the lawyers can check title, and then it takes 6 weeks, and you can then transfer title the regular way you do with any condominium. So that's going to happen with 90% of the purchasers, and they are an interim occupant for anywhere from 2 to 6 months, and then they become owners in the regular way that any condominium project would work.
Okay.
Where there's a twist is that somebody who will have signed up as a rent owner, which means they only have $500 to put down, that's the minimum we require. Then they agree to start saving at least $100 a month during the construction period. And as long as they maintain their payments at $100 a month, they will be somewhere around $2,000. But they need to have at least $5,000 in order to become reach the 1% that we said is the target for that group. So they move in as interim occupant just like anybody else would. They have responsibility for taking care of their suite just like anybody else would. And the equity growth start to accumulate for them. So as long as they maintain their $100 a month, which in this example would probably take them 3 years to get to the 5,000. When they hit 5,000, title is transferred, even though they've acted as an owner for that 3-year period. So that's what makes it a bit unusual. But if you forget that, the process of becoming titled owner is exactly the same as for any other condominium development. The only unusualness is you go from being a member of the developer to an owner, because you're effectively building for yourself. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Yes.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you. So, Michelle, just to be clear, all the units are condominium ownership rather than freehold. Is that correct?
Yes, as long
Okay.
as we determine that that's the most cost-effective way to do it. If there was a smaller village that said, we're going to allow you to go in and give freehold title because we're going to give you a good rate on the hookup charges and stuff, then we might consider it. But generally speaking, you can get much better hookup and servicing charges by being a condominium.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. My second question, Michelle, normally you need, I heard you mention 3% down, and also that in most cases, there's no CMHC fee or the fees avoided to insure the mortgage. Can you help me understand, in most cases, you need 20% down to avoid CMHC fees or mortgage insurance. Can you help me fill in that gap there? How do you get to avoiding the CMHC with just 3% down?
So the way that CMHC works is that they have a flexibilities category for affordable housing. So if you meet the flexibilities category, they will recognize other things as part of a person's down payment. So they'll recognize sweat equity in the case of Habitat for Humanity. But in our case, the community wealth loan, which is the value difference between the cost, they recognize that as someone's down payment. So if you have 17% down, the 3% brings you to 20.
So they're treating that as equity effectively.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, going to members of the advisory committee. Don, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have. I know from other stuff we do in the economic development, if there's monies, whether they're lent or whether they're not forgiven, but they're just not paid out right now. The municipality, and I'm not sure about CMHC, are going to want to have some kind of charge on title to ensure that at some point they get paid. How does that, Michelle, how does that work?
Yeah, two things there. One, normally the guarantor of that money ends up being Community Wealth. And they will have a mortgage on title for the full value of all of the participants. And that mortgage will be different at different times. So all we're looking for from the municipality is deferral of development charges till closing of the condominium. So during the construction period, there'll be a mortgage to protect that interest, and that those development charges will be the ones that are to be deferred with respect to the legislation. When we close on the condominium, then we will be borrowing money from either the province or from a pension fund in order to pay the municipality. So from the point of closing on the condominium, the municipality does not have any outstanding expenses. Everything's been paid. When we get down to the deferral of the property taxes, separate arrangement is related specifically to those units. But on the whole, the community, it was important to us to make the municipalities whole as soon as it was reasonable to make them whole, because they're the weakest level of government in terms of taxability, right? So, so we wanted to go to the province and to the feds to get the loans that lasted a long time.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, thanks, Don. Thanks, Council. So again, thanks, Councillor Kitchers, for bringing this to our front door. This is important things, and I know since the county oversees the housing function, the county's Attainable Housing Working Group will be working with Home Opportunities, not-for-profit, to see if we can get closer to providing a home ownership-based component to attainable housing. So there's a realization that that's not the only thing, but there's a really neat opportunity here, and so thanks, Councillor Kitchers, for bringing this to our front door. And there's a role to play for the member municipalities for sure. The county's working group is set up to go to the next level with that, so that's really good. So thanks, Michael, thanks, Mike, for bringing this to us, and thanks, Peter, for the support there. We look forward to talking with you more. There's no recommendation for council at this. It was just brought for information. So appreciate you coming and speaking to us about this exciting approach.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to working with you further. It's very exciting.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, moving on, no delegations today. Consideration of reports. The first thing that we have is a negotiated award for thermal imaging cameras, and that's brought to us courtesy of Dan Wilson. See you later, Don.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is a request coming out of the fire department. They are looking to acquire 2 thermal imaging cameras. The request is to stick with the brand of thermal imaging camera that is currently in use, which is the MSA brand. Obviously, there's a number of advantages to that. The firefighters are very comfortable with this brand, plus there are battery interchangeability benefits to using the same brand. There is one sole distributor of the MSA brand in this area, AJ Stone Co. So we are recommending that from a compatibility point of view, that we just negotiate award with AJ Stone for the thermal imaging cameras. You'll see in the financial implications section, we're well within budget. This was a project identified in the 2021 capital budget. So nothing else really to add. Happy to take any questions, and Chief Mulvey is here as well to help with any technical questions.
Thanks very much, Dan. Questions from council? Councillor McRae?
Thank you, Marilyn. I don't have any questions. I support this.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, it was approved in the budget. It came in under budget, so I'm happy with it.
Councillor Kitchers?
No questions.
Councillor McElwain?
No questions.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
No questions, thanks.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Question for Chief Mulvey. Tom, two questions. What is the normal life of a thermal imaging camera, and how old are the ones that we have currently in service?
Thermal imaging camera, it's hard to guess the life. It's how many times they go into a hot fire and things such as that. But you can imagine 10, and I think we're sitting with the ones that we have now that are about a 5-year, halfway through their cycle. This is to add to different vehicles, so more firefighters will be able to take thermal imaging cameras into a structure or do search and rescue or find fire in the walls.
So how many cameras total would we have then, Tom, if we buy these?
4.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington, authorize the negotiated award for the purchase of 2 thermal imaging cameras to AJ Stone Company Limited at a cost of $24,860 plus HST. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor McWayne. All in favor? And that's carried. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Tom. 10.2. Amendment to Animal Control Bylaw and Implementation of DOCIPET. I should have looked at that word before I ended up saying it. The reports is from Lisa. Lisa, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that report? Go ahead.
Just briefly, as outlined in the report, the reason this is before you is our current our current animal control system is at the end of life. It was home built on older technology and has created issues over the past few years for the end users, that being the citizens who have pets that they register and processing payments and registering. So township staff are recommending that we move forward with a provider of a system called DocuPet, which is used by a number of municipalities, including a number of our neighbors, to register your pet, where there's benefits to the pet owners as well as the township. At this time, if we're able to implement this system, there would be no change to the budget, except that we're asking for one time to add additional money to the budget to notify existing pet owners of the system change. So that's all I have for now, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thanks, Lisa. Questions from council? Councillor Foster?
No questions, thank you.
Councillor Van Leeuwen? Councillor McWayne?
No questions.
Councillor Kittress?
No questions.
Councillor Dunsmore? Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. Great initiative. I had a chance to check their website and I was quite impressed with what I saw. So congrats. Look forward to seeing this happening.
I'll read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington, authorizing the mayor and municipal clerk to sign a licensing service agreement with DocuPet Inc. and that bylaw is 2019-70, a bylaw to regulate the keeping, registration, licensing, control, and welfare of certain classes of animals in the Township of Centre Wellington, be amended to permit a 365-day licensing renewal program. Mover, please, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? And that's carried. Thanks very much, Lisa. 10.3, recommended approach to completing a speed limit review. I'll turn things over to Adam. Welcome, Adam.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mayor Linton. Through you, just wanted to provide a few notes on the report today. I wanted to acknowledge also the work of my team on preparing this report, and Adam Dickinson in particular has been instrumental in doing a lot of the research and pulling this information together. So we were requested to review speed limits in rural areas through the process of a consolidated speed bylaw. As the mayor and members of council may be aware, there's been much in the news lately about proposed approaches by the county and neighboring municipalities related to speed limit reviews. And so to initiate this process, staff completed a detailed review of approaches and lessons learned from other jurisdictions, including neighboring municipalities and the county, in addition to communication with local OPP related to speed enforcement. So based on the information gathered from this review, staff are proposing to develop what we're referring to as a speed limit policy and technical approach to establishing, reviewing, and modifying speeds in urban and rural areas, which is founded on data from various sources. So this would be a data-driven approach. Examples of data which would be considered include characteristics of the road, so the road geometry, the road setting, is it located close to a school or another sensitive feature like that, traffic surveys and speed data, observations and concerns from members of the public, historical collisions and law enforcement data, and any other relevant data. So this approach is anticipated to result in better compliance, as the posted limit would reflect road characteristics. So it has been shown, and we have learned based on the experience of others, that speed limits that are lowered without geometric warrants have little effect on long-term operating speed. Essentially, people will drive as fast as they're comfortable driving on a road. Areas which are known to be problematic could be targeted during the review. It would create a consistent and defensible decision-making process and provide traceable and measurable safety benefits. So we're proposing to report back to council with a proposed speed limit policy and technical approach, which, and as part of that presentation, we would include some real examples of how the approach would be applied to some of the township's roads and the outcome in terms of revised speed limits. And we're proposing to bring that report back in November. And then finally, pending council endorsement of that approach, we would complete a detailed review of current speed limits, applying the approach. And that would be in the urban and rural areas of the township, and then draft a consolidated speed bylaw that includes the proposed speed limit modifications that are warranted under the approach. And we would be presenting that back to council in the winter of 2022. So we feel that this type of data-driven approach to reviewing speed limits, it is consistent with what we're seeing from other jurisdictions and neighboring municipalities, including the county. And therefore, we feel like it's a consistent and appropriate approach for the township. So that's all I have, and I'm joined here by Adam Dickinson, and we're happy to answer any questions or hear any comments you might have on the report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adam. I love hearing the words consistent and defensible. I think that's absolutely critical when we look at this. So thanks for that report. Questions from council? Councillor Foster.
Two questions, Mayor. First of all, Adam, can you help me understand what will be different about our internal policy on speeding that is substantially different from the current Highway Traffic Act approach? The Highway Traffic Act's very, the default speeds being 80 in the country and 50 in town. What's going to be different about this? Once we bring it forward, what's this going to achieve?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Foster, and through you, Mayor Linton. So I think, Councillor Foster, as you alluded to, the Highway Traffic Act is kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to speed limits. Whereas I think the approach we're proposing is going to actually look at the different characteristics of different roads within the township, and and kind of evaluate, is a speed limit of 80 kilometers an hour appropriate on this road, given the geometry, given the setting, given historical data, and given what we're hearing from residents, importantly. And so it allows us to go kind of piece by piece and do a bit of a review of the posted speed limit currently, and then to try and determine, is a reduction warranted based on what we know about that particular segment of road, versus applying more of a blanket policy of the 80 applies here and 50 applies here. We'd actually be taking into consideration the features of these specific road segments.
Great, thanks, Adam, for that. Councillor Foster, follow on.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Adam, for that response. My second question, Adam, we all, as councillors, we all hear about speeding very, very often. I personally hear from residents. In the last month, I've heard from probably 8 to 10 different residents who are concerned about speeding. My question, Adam, is, policies and so on are nice, but what's really needed is a greater amount of police enforcement. What has to happen so that we can get more police response and more police enforcement of speeding?
I'm not sure. This question was asked, I think, a couple councils ago. I'm not sure what staff's response to this would be. But Colin or Adam, if you have any thoughts about the process that we take to engage the OPP, because obviously we don't tell them what to do. Colin?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Councillor Foster, and through Mayor Linton. So yeah, we are in regular communication with OPP. So usually when we do receive a complaint, we are forwarding that information onto OPP. They are assisting us as well with gathering data at the areas where we receive complaints. So we get an idea of the magnitude of the speeding concern and whether or not that might trigger enforcement. So definitely a lot of communication happening between staff and OPP. But again, OPP, as I mentioned previously at the previous council meeting, they drive their own responsibility or own priorities when it comes to enforcement activities.
But it's fair to say, Colin, that the OPP are involved in identifying what those hot spots are locally?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're sharing information with them as we collect it and vice versa. So that they can target areas that are actual real problems instead of perceived problems.
Councillor Foster, follow on.
Thank you, Mayor. That isn't really the question I intended to ask. Colin, in Side Road 19 being one example, all of the above have occurred, and the data indicate that 400 people are speeding every day, yet the police did not undertake to do any additional enforcement. That's not going to address the issue. 400 vehicles a day are speeding on Side Road 19. How do we get the police to be out there ticketing?
Again, it goes back to the several answers to that. We inform the OPP, as Colin has mentioned already, and the OPP set their priorities and they report into the Police Services Board at the county. So again,
it's not sufficient. It's not working, Mayor.
Yeah, I know it's not working, and you understanding that the answer has been provided, but that's the answer. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, one of my questions is, are we going to be looking at surrounding municipalities and trying to match some of the things up? At the very least, I see some of the things, lesson learned from other municipalities. If we have adjoining gravel roads, which they have speed limits that ours match, will that conversation take place with adjoining municipalities as we continue with this?
Yeah, Adam?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Van Leeuwen, through you, Mayor Linton. So absolutely, I think that's part of the process. Is we want to ensure some consistency. We want to be communicating with our neighboring municipalities to ensure that there is consistency on those boundary roads. So I think that is part of this process that we are proposing.
Thanks, Adam. Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. I look forward to the report back in November. I'm hoping it will include, and I'm sure it will include, variables such as shoulder width and on the various roads and that type of thing, because I find that's one of our on the side roads in Centre Wellington and out here in Pilkington in particular. I'm thinking that there's no shoulders on the roads, and so it's very unsafe for bicyclists and everybody else on where there's hills and curves and etc., because people still travel at 80 to 100 along those roads, and it's very dangerous. So I guess whatever measurements you use, I'm hoping that those types of things are included.
Adam, offhand, do you know if existence of shoulders is included as one of the criteria?
Yes, Mayor Linton, through you and to Councillor McElwain also. So we've started developing a framework. We've got kind of a brainstorm list of, these are the things we should be accounting for. And I think that's a great comment about shoulders, and absolutely that's something that we would consider.
Okay, good. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Linton. Adam, I just want to make sure we've got a stack of complaints, but we've also got a stack of historical data that we've got already. So I'm assuming that you're going from that, because I'm thinking November is pretty quick to do a comprehensive study. So we have historic data there we're working with?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Dunsmore, for the question. Through you, Mayor Linton. So to be clear, Councillor Dunsmore, so in November, we'll be coming back with the framework for how we'll apply the review. And then we have the bigger task of actually undertaking the review. And that's where we would kind of mine that data, that historical data that we have, to take it into consideration as part of the review. As we develop the framework for the review, we want to be mindful in keeping track of what information we do have. So I think that's part of how we build this. But the big exercise of actually diving into that data and applying it, that would be the next step.
Okay, because my biggest concern is where we have smaller groups of houses clumped on county roads, on country roads, and the amount of speed that's going through there. So as long as we cover off the condition of the road and use the historic data, then I think we're going forward in a positive manner.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Very informative report. I agree with the recommendation and proposed approach. I prefer the policy-driven approach to speed limit revisions as opposed to the blanket policy approach. We need to be smart, not reducing speeds where inappropriate and where there is no possibility of enforcement. Question I have is, does approval of this report support developing a traffic calming policy, implementation of community safety zones aligned with the county, and curve warning and advisory signs? The reason I ask that is we need to encourage safe streets and sharing the road for all forms of transportation so that our residents and children can safely drive, walk, or cycle our community.
Yeah, Adam? Go.
Yes, thank you, Councillor McCray, and through you, Mayor Linton. So Councillor McCray, great point about traffic calming policy. You'll note in the report that we did mention that could be added to this framework, and that's something we will be considering if that is if it makes sense to kind of include those types of considerations in this framework, and we'll include that as part of what we report back on in November.
Councillor McCray, following?
Thank you, Marilyn. So Adam, what you're saying is that in November is when council will be asked whether or not we want to include the traffic calming policy and safety zones? Or do we need to give you that approval now?
Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so I think there's some concurrent work I understand that's happening at the county level that we want to take into consideration. We want to ensure that we're kind of taking a consistent approach in that regard. I think, Councillor McCray, we need to give it a bit of thought at the staff level here in terms of how we bring that all together. So I guess what staff are proposing is that we would perhaps come back with a recommendation in that regard through the November report.
Thanks, councillors, for that. I'll ask for any additional comments in a sec. I just want to make a couple. So as you know, the county is moving ahead on a pretty substantial road master plan as well, which includes driver calming areas and things like that. So there's a significant amount of overlap in both these projects. So for the framework that we're going to see in November, if it could explicitly identify where the touch points with the county's work are, that'd be really, really good, because it's really important that we're moving in a parallel fashion right now. And I think we are. Nothing's alerting me to the fact that we're not moving in the same direction, but I think making that sure we're on the same page with a lot of these items is going to be critical. critical. So with both the township and the county moving ahead on this at the same time, we have an opportunity to do something really good in the benefit of citizens and residents across the township and across the county. So now's the time to do it right and make sure we're doing it together. So thanks for that. Any follow-on questions from members of council? Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question regarding this issue about speed. Is one of the, has been mentioned by other councillors, is one of the most common queries and complaints and things that citizens give. So I'm just wondering, is there going to be a component of citizen input in the development of this policy? That's my first question. I also, it's not for this term, but there is been brought up the whole issue of enforcement. And when you have the OPP, which is a larger organization for a larger area, monitor your policing, you know, they're short-staffed and they have all sorts of budgetary recommendations and things that they have to do. But when you have a more local police force, they, as Fergus did at one time, they just monitor what your small municipality, and so enforcement can be more focused on what you want. That's a whole other issue, but I'm just saying that in terms of enforcement, that is a strategic plan item that perhaps in the future some other councillors can figure out. But in terms of the question about the public input, I think that that's one of the most important things on this issue, because the public, they just have lots of things to say about this, and a lot of good ideas on how to put together a policy. So will it be done?
Go ahead, Adam.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Councillor Kittredge, and through you, Mayor Linton. So yeah, some great points there. I think with respect to public input, Councillor Kittredge, I think that the review certainly takes the public's input into consideration, and that we're going to be looking at where we've been hearing, what we've been hearing from in different areas in the way of, you know, resident inquiries about speeding and or concerns raised about speeding. I think the assessment kind of inherently takes that input into consideration. And with respect to, you know, additional public outreach, it's something certainly we can consider. You know, I think the challenge would be, of course, you know, getting some meaningful input prior to kind of, you know, the November timeframe when we want to come back with this report. But I think that's certainly something that we can take into consideration.
I think I just wanted to add to that, the county, what the county has done, and that is those heat, people were sent lots of opportunities for input on the hot spots across the county, which didn't differentiate between county roads and township roads. So we got a lot of information on our local township roads that are a problem as well. And people had the opportunity to identify on a map the key intersections and the key stretches of road that they thought were the worst areas across the county, including Centre Wellington. So I think that information can definitely be leveraged for this project for another use. In addition, all members of council, township across the county, municipally and countywide, should have been provided an opportunity to send in comments on where they saw the hot spots across and the areas where they got the most complaints, because we want to take seriously complaints that we got as county and township councillors. And so that invitation was sent to all members of the council, and I know that the county did receive a lot of input back from the local councillors across the county, and so hopefully this project will be able to leverage that input as well. Any other questions? Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. From what I understand, the complete policy will not be done in November. It's just the parameters of how the policy will be developed. Is that correct?
Adam?
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Kittredge. Through you, Mayor Linton. We are proposing to come back with the policy itself, Councillor Kittredge, and the method that will apply to doing the review. So I think it is kind of the policy itself. You know, we would lay out the parameters, how they work, how we apply them, and use some examples as to how that might work in the real world. So it would be we would be presenting the method. We will not have completed kind of the full application of the policy to all the different roads, but we would be presenting the kind of the method and the policy itself.
Councillor Kittredge?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was just wondering, so will you be using the county's data, like of all this public input, or like how will you be developing the policy? See, my understanding is that this is kind of two-phased of how you're going to apply it. And, you know, I don't know whether you have enough. So today is, I mean, basically you have a month to develop the policy. So I'm a little bit concerned that citizens will not have as good a possibility to have input on this. I just get this. I think when they have input on stuff and it's really known to them, we don't get, and if we tell them later, well, we have a policy, and they say, well, I wasn't consulted. Like, that's what they always say to me. And I was just wondering whether maybe we could just do this in two phases, because I realize that in applying this policy, there will be financial parts to it, which you want for the budget, right? Is that correct?
Adam?
Yeah, thanks again, Councillor Kittredge. Through you, Mayor Linton. So yes, that's a good point. That's noted, and perhaps we could consider, you know, how we phase it in terms of how we present the policy itself. You know, I think that when we present the policy in November, it would be, you know, I think it would be for consideration at that time, and perhaps that could include, you know, some type of outreach at that time on the policy itself. I think it will be, you know, it will definitely be technical in nature, you know, just with respect to kind of the different parameters that are considered. And with respect to future budget considerations, I think that comes later when we present you know, the report in 2022 on the outcome of the review, because we wouldn't be able to quantify kind of budget implications until that time, until we applied the policy and understand what the impacts are to existing speed limits.
Okay, I'm going to read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington receives for information a recommended approach to completing a speed limit review as outlined in report number IS 2021-09 dated September 20th, 2021, and that Council of the Township of Centre Wellington directs staff to develop a speed limit policy and technical approach and report back to the Township of Council in November 2021 as outlined in report number IS 2021-09. Mover for that, please. Councillor McCray, second by Councillor Dunsmore, all in favor? And that's carried. Thanks very much for that, Adam and Colin. Looking forward to that, and I'm sure our citizens are as well. Information items, we have three sets of information items. One, the minutes from Heritage Centre Wellington. Two, the minutes from the Community Services Advisory Committee. And three, the Committee of the Whole tracking list. Any questions from council on any of those three items? Councillor McCray.
I have no questions.
Councillor Dunsmore.
No questions.
Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question about the tracking list. I was just wondering, it sort of said the fall for that staff implementation policy. I was just wondering when exactly is that going to be in the fall? Like,
Through you, Mayor Linton. So we're looking to bring that back in October, November.
Councillor McElwain,
No questions.
Councillor Van Leeuwen,
No questions.
Councillor Foster,
No questions.
okay, no approval required from council on those items. Reconsideration of decision 12.1. So on August the 30th, 2021, St. David Street reconstruction resolution was passed by council on June 28th, 2021. And I have a reconsideration motion here that the council, and I'll read it, that the council of the Township of Centre Wellington reconsider the following decision. That the council of the Township of Centre Wellington endorses conceptual design option 4 for the reconstruction of St. David Street North from St. Andrew Street to Edinburgh Avenue. And Fergus is outlined in report number IS 2021-13 dated June 21st, 2021. And the council directs staff to proceed with preparing and submitting an application for grant funding under the Province of Ontario's Connecting Links program for the St. David Street North, St. Andrew Street to Edinburgh Avenue reconstruction project. So can I get a move and a seconder to reconsider this, please? Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. And I just want to, and I'll give members an opportunity to speak to this reconsideration motion in a second, but I just wanted to remind councillors what the rules for reconsideration were. And I'm going to ask Carrie to correct anything I've said wrong. So my feeling is after it's moved and it's seconded, we can have debate, and then it requires a 2/3 majority in order to pass reconsideration. On a council of 7, that means 5 have to vote in favor of reconsideration. Once we reconsider it, then we identify a date in the future where this will be this option will be reconsidered. Staff will come back at that point, and we'll have the staff report, and then we'll be able to reconsider it as council. I also believe, based on our procedures bylaw, that you can only reconsider the same decision of council once in a term of council. So I think those are the rules. Have I missed anything, Carrie? Okay. Everybody clear on that? And I will turn things over to council for your thoughts on reconsidering the St. David Street reconstruction project. And I will start with Councillor Foster.
Well, thank you, Mayor. First of all, Mayor and members of council, I've taken a long and hard look at this issue, and I've tried to evaluate it from all sides, and it's a very divisive one, which troubles me greatly. I personally am a cyclist. My son is a very avid cyclist, and this is not about council being in favor of cycling or not in favor of cycling. So I want to just state unequivocally that I'm very much in favor of having cycling infrastructure in our community, and I'd really like to see us act on that. Today, we're talking very specifically about a very specific thing, which is segregated bike lanes on a provincial highway, or a connecting link, as we call it. That's the decision we're facing, and I believe we made an error in making the decision last time in endorsing option 4. And I think we erred in that decision because we never had sufficient and complete information to make a well-informed decision. We also did not fully consider the public input that was made into the decision, onto this issue. In fact, we've all received a copy of a document from citizen Larry Van Wyck, and Larry's submission was very clear, and it shows just how many things we failed to consider, how sort of inadequate the information we had actually was. And I want to highlight some of those points. First of all, our own transportation master plan identifies St. David Street as an artery. It also points out that St. David Street North is already congested. It speaks to that. Our own master plan speaks to those two key things. And yet here we are. I don't feel we adequately considered those things in making our decision. it's also, we have to also consider very specifically what will be the impact on traffic. Adding segregated bike lanes is going to be on a very busy roadway. What's going to be the traffic impact? And I don't think we adequately did a dive into that. There's going to be an impact, for example, on traffic spillover. I live right near, not very far away from this area, and I can say anecdotally, it often takes more than one red light to get through the various intersections. It's a very, we all know it's a very, very busy roadway, perhaps the very busiest one in the whole township. And I don't think we adequately looked at what the impact of narrowing that artery that's already congested is going to be on a whole host of things, not the least of which is the spillover of traffic onto other side streets. I already received complaints about trucks on some of the side streets. What's going to happen when a congested roadway becomes even more so congested? We're going to force trucks onto some of our side streets, in my view. We also, I don't recall any discussion about the impact of a congested roadway will be on emergency response time. I don't recall any input from the fire department, the ambulance, the police on the impact of bike lanes on the highway. In particular, the bump outs on the highway as well are going to, in my view, cause congestion. We're impacting the turning radiuses onto the highway and off of the highway for all kinds of large vehicles. That is going to make congestion even worse. That's going to force traffic onto side streets. It's going to have an impact on emergency response times. There's also quite a few basic operational matters that we really didn't consider. If we create bike lanes, we must maintain them. And I'm speaking in particular about things like snow removal. There's going to be a segregated curb that will make it much more difficult to clear the snow from the road lanes. And it's also going to create a fairly tight lane that also we must clear the snow from that. I also have questions about how that curving is going to impact surface drainage of the highway. And none of these operational matters were really fully explored. The most important, in my view, of which is congestion. And this is why this is not a cyclist versus non-cyclist issue. This is a serious congestion issue. There's all kinds of ramifications that we never fully explored. And this is why I made the motion to explore them by revisiting the decision. I don't believe this was good planning to put bike lanes on the highway, on a very congested artery, on a very congested roadway. And I think it's a bad decision. And this is why we must revisit this decision.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, I just look at the information that we have before us, and I don't believe that the Highway 6 corridor is the greatest spot for bike lanes. Although at first glance, when we began this, when you're doing a highway, you want to try to capitalize on all projects possible. But as I reconsider and look at the project more, I do believe that the bike lanes would be better in a different roadway if possible. So the only way to get there is to reconsider this prior to actually really digging into the data. So I'm in favor of reconsidering and looking at it.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. I think Councillor Foster kind of covered pretty much everything I could think of to say on the topic, with one exception, and that is the one issue I had with the bike lane as it is currently proposed was that it ends up at a very dangerous intersection with St. Andrew Street, and I don't think it's a safe place to have a bike lane end to begin with. So But on top of that, I just don't think that we were well prepared to make that decision the first time around. I think we just, as Bob said, took advantage of a highway rework situation, and it was the wrong decision at that time. We just didn't have enough information.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to first say I'd like a recorded vote for this. I think Councillor Foster has stated a lot of things that I have concerns with, as has Councillor McElwain and Councillor Van Leeuwen. I've always thought that safety was one of the primary problems with this proposal. And I'd like to thank all the citizens. I'd like to edge O'Shaughnessy and especially Larry Van Wyck for giving that last piece of this last week. Very informative, tremendous amounts of looking through our transportation master plan and seeing how we weren't given all the information. So I'm for reconsidering this. I'd also like to encourage citizens that if this is defeated, to petition the province with your proposals that we haven't had all the information, and petition them to not give us the monies for this. So that this will, because that budgetary problem with this is that it is way too expensive. Not only just the safety issues. It is between $3.5 and $4 million projected for something that we weren't given all the information for. And I would encourage citizens to do that if this is defeated. And I think that that is the proper mechanism for it coming back to council, because as a budgetary item, I believe that there are alternatives that are financially much better. I had proposed the Provost Lane as a single lane that connects two nodes, the library node and the park north of it. And I believe that that could be done for just unbelievably less money. Having traveled across Canada to visit my son, I see that other municipalities have bike lanes. They don't, because they have to plow in the prairies extensively. They don't use barriers. They use those indentations on the road, double indentations for drivers, because they know they have to plow so extensively for snow and removal of ice. And I think that these are things that we didn't have those presented to us. And I think that we really should reconsider this. And it's not about being against bike lanes. I'm for bike lanes. We could have the greatest bike lanes and trail system in Ontario for $4 million. And like, this is just spent for less than a kilometer, we're going to be spending this much money. It's mind boggling. Anyway, that's what I think.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of reconsideration. I think we had the information that we needed. I think we were looking at concepts. The final concept would be reviewed and safety concerns can be addressed then. This is about smart growth. We have a master transportation plan that talks about multi-use roads. We have to start thinking that way. I've listened to residents complain that we're comparing ourselves to Toronto and Mississauga, and we're not Toronto, Mississauga. You're right, we're not. But you also say we should get rid of this idea because Guelph is closing theirs down and so is Kitchener-Waterloo. Well, we're not Guelph and Kitchener-Waterloo either. We are where they were 30 to 40 years ago. We're at 28% 48,000 people, and we're going to be mandated to grow to 50. If we don't start growing smart now, we're going to be looking down the road at 2031 and saying, we should have done this then. So it is controversial. I understand that. But the only thing we can do is start thinking about smart growth, multi-use roads. If we find safety concerns when the final concept comes in, we can make changes to it then. But it's time that we started getting traffic into the downtown core in other ways other than cars, and we start planning our city that way. So I'm not in favor of rethinking this at all.
Sorry, Councillor Kittredge, I'm going around the room once and then I'm calling the vote. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. There's nothing in our original decision that requires reconsideration. We identified a preferred design in keeping with our transportation master plan complete streets policy. Staff indicated the design will meet or exceed all applicable design standards and ensure a safe and efficient flow of traffic considering current and future travel demands. The complete streets policy aligns with Council's strategic plan that promotes safe and well-maintained vehicle, pedestrian, and cycling infrastructure. Council gave approval to staff to initiate a consultation process to inform the detailed design phase of the project. We continue to receive stakeholder feedback that will be considered. Council was also provided with initial high-level cost estimates, excluding provincial grants, that Council accepted in choosing option 4. As we proceed with the design process, we will start to fine-tune the costs. Staff indicated they still need to pursue grant funding. At this point, Council needs to allow staff to do their job of developing a detailed design and associated costs for Council review and approval and applying for provincial funding. We will have more opportunities to review, comment, and possibly change the design at a later date. In respect to one resident's specific letter outlining concerns, I'd like to point out that it's important to consider a highway through the middle of a town is different beast to the highway outside of town. Traffic flow and speeds are reduced. Salt spray and snow thrown by plows are reduced. Tree species within urban areas are selected based on resistance to salt spray. Look at the healthy trees growing along our various urban streets. Given the proximity of buildings adjacent to Highway 6 through Fergus, there is no possibility of additional traffic lanes within Fergus. Adding cycling lanes, improved sidewalks, and street trees is not removing any of the current lanes. Traffic flow and speed will continue to be reduced through Fergus. Future arterial, collector, and truck bypass road networks and 2 additional bridges are going to alleviate traffic congestion on Highway 6 through Fergus. These are identified in our Transportation Master Plan. With regard to our Trails Master Plan of 2014, Fergus routes require more discussion. There needs to be more direct route connection of the trails to downtown to support tourism. Everything that we initially agreed to in option 4, we're following it, so I don't see any need to reconsider.
Thanks, councillors. I want to make a couple comments. The first thing I want to address some of the comments I heard about staff not providing fulsome or complete information. I find that completely false. If council wants to reconsider a decision that you made, take responsibility for your vote. We had all the information that we needed at the time, and we voted the way we voted. If council felt like they didn't have all the information, every single member of council has the opportunity to move a deferral. You should never feel like you don't have all the information, so you're voting a certain way. And there was no deferral asked for. It's because we had all the information and we made our vote. I took my vote seriously when I voted the first time. We also went through a process making sure that this decision and reconsideration was done in a very open way. Really appreciate the feedback that we got from the delegations, both delegations that came at different dates. Really appreciate the fact that we got that information back from our citizens, and that's the way democracy is supposed to work. And so thanks to Ed and the other delegations that came and provided all that hard work and provided us with their input. We always knew, and we always said from day one, that public input was one of our criteria for moving forward. But the other criteria that we have is making sure that we're building for the future. We're not building for existing use, we're building for future use. And that means that we have to follow the recommendations that we have built into our very expensive master plans that we've approved as council. And that is to make sure that we're developing a very functioning active transportation network across Centre Wellington. And you have to start somewhere. Starting on a main street is where we should start, because it's going to be a significant reconstruction, and making sure that we build for the future and being progressive about it, and ensure that there is a spine for new active transportation network across Centre Wellington right here in downtown Fergus. So I'm very much opposed to a reconsideration, because nothing new has come to the table, and we had the information that we needed to make our decision the first time. And so that's the way my vote is going to remain. And at this point, I will turn it over to our clerk to go through the recorded vote process.
Okay, just a reminder that the motion on the table is to reconsider the previous decision. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Yes.
Councillor Foster?
In favor of reconsideration, yes.
Councillor McElwain?
Yes.
Councillor McRae?
No.
Councillor Kittredge?
Yes.
Councillor Dunsmore?
No.
And Mayor Linton?
No.
We have not achieved 2/3 majority vote.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor, for that discussion. That's all that we have on our agenda today. So at this point, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Kittredge, second by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thanks, and have a good rest of the day.